Libya's National Transitional Council praises Qatar's role in the revolution. But what's really behind this country's involvement in Libya? What does it stand to gain there? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome once again to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Well, they called themselves the Friends of Libya, and on Thursday, 63 world leaders met in Paris to discuss the country's future. Among them was the Emir of Qatar. And while he admitted that Muammar Gaddafi could not have been toppled without NATO, he also did point out that the Arab League could have done more.
With the available armies and air forces of the Arab countries, we might have been able to carry out operations without the help of NATO, but this was not the case.
Well, Qatar was the first Arab nation to support the Allied forces and to send its jets into Libya. The move was praised by Western leaders, who said the intervention was a turning point for the region. But as this Gulf Emirate works to cement its role as a world player, is it being overly ambitious? And are these moves potentially risky? Well, let's lay a little bit of groundwork here by giving you just a brief description of Qatar's involvement in Libya thus far. Now, on March the 21st, Qatar News Agency announced that the country will participate in the enforcement of the UN-mandated no-fly zone over Libya. A week later, Qatar became the first Arab country to recognise the National Transitional Council as Libya's sole legitimate representative. Then in late March, Libyan rebels began broadcasting from Qatar on a new TV channel called Libya, the new channel for all free Libyans. And then on April the 14th, in a meeting with President Barack Obama in Washington, D.C., Qatar confirmed it was supplying weapons to the Libyan rebels. And then most recently, on September the 1st, Jazeera English revealed that documents found at Libya's Ministry of Intelligence suggested that Qatar was one of 3 GCC countries that had hidden weapons and military equipment at refugee camps in Tunisia. That's the background. Let's pick up the topic with our guests. We have with us today in Doha, Jassim Sultan, who's a Qatari historian and director of Tanmiya Institute for Public Research. Also in Doha, David Roberts is deputy director of the Royal United Services Institute in Qatar. And in Manama, Mansour Al-Rayed, chairman of the Gulf Council for Foreign Relations. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us today. I want to first bring up this issue of trying to determine exactly how responsible Qatar might have been for what's happened in Libya and whether it deserves praise in what it has done. Let me begin with you, Jassim Sultan. What do you think was Qatar's role here? Because many other people, Nicolas Sarkozy, David Cameron, and the New York Times claiming benefit for America, are hoping to be lauded as the major players in this. Do you think Qatar is amongst those big players?
I wouldn't say it's a big player in regards of as a huge country like any one of big NATO countries, but Qatar plays a major role actually in helping the Libyan people to overcome this problem, which was not expected by anyone at that time.
But the situation in much of the Western and the English language media is praising Qatar, not just in the Libyan context, but for everything else that it's doing. I mean, everyone's beginning to notice Qatar, if not for Al Jazeera, then for the World Cup, the Olympic bid, and many of the other elements of foreign policy that it's been undertaking, isn't it?
I think most of the people see Qatar as an example because a small country like Qatar playing this sort of role in helping others and looking to the international community and communicate well with all parties in the world system. This is something which anybody can see and can recognize.
David Roberts, to you, is Qatar's involvement in Libya a one-off event, or does it herald an attempt to become a player in this region and perhaps further afield?
Well, Qatar has been trying and succeeding sporadically for over a decade now to significantly augment its role, especially considering the fact that, as we all know, it's a very small country. I mean, its involvements in Darfur, for example, Lebanon and so on, they clearly indicate a country with a strong appetite to, embellish its image and do some good around the region. Going back to your earlier question of how much credit Qatar should get, I mean, initially we mustn't forget that, for example, it's likely that parts of the East would have run out of, for example, diesel or cooking oil, or wouldn't have been able to sell the oil. I mean, Qatar stepped in these extremely sort of simple but practical ways and helped out there. And one of the things I would just add is that recently, I mean, all sorts of unconfirmed, but a lot of reports coming out about the notion of Qatari military involvement to a slightly further degree in terms of training the rebels, which I think is also, considering it was something of an unscripted, not necessarily highly trained sort of group of people over there. I think that's probably quite important as well.
One of the confusing aspects of the whole thing, however, would be what Qatar's long-term plans are for its diplomatic role in the region. And I guess Bahrain is a case in point, because what Qatar has done in Bahrain appears not to be particularly similar to what has happened in Libya. Mansour Al-Rayed, what do you think on that issue? Do you think Qatar's role, what do you think of Qatar's role not only in Libya but in Bahrain?
Well, I'll start with Libya, of course. It's true Qatar has taken a bigger role than the other GCC countries when it comes to Libya. Now, you have to know, I mean, Libya, it's basically, it's a neighbor of the European Union, and of course it shouldn't be a failed state, and it should be a very stable state. Plus, it's a future relationship with Qatar in terms of oil reserves. I mean, Qatar is about 1.6 million barrels per day, it contributes 2% of the world oil, and also it holds about $77 billion of wealth. Now, this is important that it can couple with Qatar in terms of partnering for future investments. That's good for both Qatar and for Libya. And this long-term risk that actually Qatar took has been rewarded, because currently the NTC has been recognized by the Arab League, it has been recognized by the EU, and they will have the next conference in New York. And you will find Qatar benefiting nicely, I mean, including, of course, the addition of humanitarian aid and so on. You will find Russia and Qatar would be one of the biggest suppliers of gas in the world, and that could help leverage the relationships. Now, in terms of Bahrain, I mean, Bahrain is a different context, because the reason is that you're looking at it from a GCC context. And within a GCC context, Bahrain and all the other GCC basically are not a revolution. They are a reform process. And each country would have its evolution its own way. Now, that evolution process within Bahrain or Oman or Saudi Arabia takes in consideration different dimensions. One of them, these countries are monarchies, and they will continue to be monarchies. And that is why we've added other countries to join. For example, we have the Jordanians to be part of that GCC, because they're also monarchies. Now, within that context, two elements needs to be considered. One of them, Bahrain tries to balance three pillars, basically. One, Western values, and also GCC context, and the two pillars
well, I mean,
of Islam.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I mean,
important.
before we start delving into Bahrain's domestic situation, I just wanted to basically try and highlight or get to some kind of understanding of where Qatar might go from here. Dave Roberts, let me put that same question to you, because Bahrain is not the only case in point. I mean, we have the military bases, the US military bases here in Qatar. We've got its relationship with Iran at the same time. I mean, there are a number of factors which would appear to be at odds with each other. How do you square all these things?
It's quite kind of simple, I think, in many ways, to be honest. I mean, if you'll forgive me resorting to cliche, I mean, politics is the art of the possible. I mean, Qatar is a small country, and in Libya, their large and wide kind of intervention there, it's by virtue of a very unusual sort of conflagration of factors. I mean, in the context of the Arab Spring, with Gaddafi there as a unique character, shall we say, and in the nature of his severe repression. So it was extremely sort of unique, so to speak. And so in Bahrain, I mean, who knows what the Emir, for example, would like to do in Bahrain, but quite simply, geopolitical reality just precludes Qatar from taking any kind of leading role or trying to insert itself there. It's quite straightforward, I think.
But if they're going to thrust themselves into the public sphere and into the political sphere of this region in the way that you suggested a moment ago, surely there has to be some clarity of direction, some sense of understanding as to what their purpose is here. And when you have Qatar attempting policies with different countries in the region that, as I say, appear to be somewhat at odds, is that going to actually help in the regional balance of power?
As you're kind of suggesting, you're completely right, of course. I mean, Qatar's foreign policy can look a bit sort of disjointed, a bit sort of hit and miss, or a bit scattershot, so to speak. But there is some kind of rhyme and reason to it, I do believe. I mean, one of the key factors that I think Qatar tries to do, I think, as you note, it tries to have relations with Israel. It has relatively good GCC relations with Iran. It has good relations with America, and we have all sorts of other actors here. We have Khalid Mashal here every now and again, Muqtada al-Sadr. These sorts of people who come to Doha as well. Qatar, the elite, I think, are trying to foster some kind of ethos about Qatar to try to separate it to some degree, as much as is possible, to give it the opportunity to go into, say, Libya, say Yemen, or they've been a bit burned there, of course, or Lebanon, or wherever, and to try to go in there and act as an honest broker, as an intermediary. Now, not necessarily just an intermediary between the protagonists on the ground, but perhaps if we step back and we try and look at this in terms of an intermediary between, say, the Muslim powers or the Muslim people and in these examples, and the West themselves, to try to use their, I mean, they have very good relations, as I say, with the West.
Right.
And if the West can go to Qatar and say, look, what is going on in Libya? What is going on in Tripoli? We want to know how to do some business there, or we want to know what's going on. And Qatar perhaps can act as their conduit. And this is a very sort of pivotal and important role that they can play.
Is it, Jassim Sultan, is that what Qatar is trying to do, act as an intermediary between East and West here? And what about relations with the Arab League and the other Arab nations? We heard the Emir just a few moments ago being quite critical about the Arab League's role in what's been happening in Libya. How is all this going to play out?
Definitely. I think if we remember what happened during the Iraqi war, that the Arab countries pulled out from that problem and leave the whole thing to the Western countries. And look what happened to Iraq. It became a disaster for all the countries around. Now, a small country like Qatar could say, well, we are conservative, we will not intervene in anything, and let things go as usual. But I think in this new world where small countries can play a role, Qatar is positioning itself somewhere in this huge world, and try to do their best in this regard to save what they can save out of the chaos which is running all around the world. Now, restructuring the system in Libya will add a point to the Arab countries, also Tunisia, Egypt. All these countries will help the small countries like Qatar in the future. So when we are looking at Qatar as a small country, we should look at Qatar as part also from the Arab countries, where the strength of the Arab countries in general will help these small countries to have a better negotiative position in the world.
At a time, though, when so many countries are lining up to benefit from Libya's oil and natural wealth and potential economic prospects, what do you think? Dave Roberts was suggesting that that the relationship with the West is going to be key in here. But what is Qatar's intention, do you think, in this regard, as it plays this role in Libya?
I think which is a legitimate sort of relation with Libya. I think the Libyan people is clever enough to know that the world is not a charity, and there is a reward for these countries will come out later, but it will be some sort of balance between the needs of the Libyan people and the needs of these countries, which is helping them. For Qatar as general, Qatar is a wealthy country, and they are helping Libyan people. Definitely they will share whatever economic benefits will come out of this of the revival of Libya, if I can say. But in general, I think it is legitimate for all the countries to look for their benefits and see what they can do for Libya and what Libya can do for them. And I think Libya is the prospect of Libya is huge in the future. I visited Libya before the revolution, and it is a marvelous country. There is a lot of resources which not being used. It's a virgin country, and everybody is looking at that country in the future.
Mansour Al-Rayed, what did you make of the Emir's comments about Arab League involvement?
Well, it's true. You see, Qatar has taken a bold step when it comes to Libya, but the Arab League have been moving forward. Like in the past, they wouldn't take this bold step of recognizing, for example, the NTC to be part of the Arab League. So there is a change in the attitude of the Arab League, basically due to the revolutions that happened, for example, in Egypt and so on. Of course, they need to be stepped up, and of course, that would help a better relationship with the West. And Qatar has taken one of these leading roles.
And do you think these events,
as I said before,
do you think these events are going to redefine the way that the Gulf countries and the Arab League countries get involved and interact with each other in times like these?
Yes, it will. It has already done that because it has helped the GCC to unite closer. It has helped that the GCC needs to evolve. It has helped that the GCC are not revolution. They are basically reform processes. And a key element in that, of course, is Islam itself, because, I mean, we shouldn't forget that Saudi Arabia is the part of the GCC, and that's an important pillar of Islam. And therefore, the West need to recognize some sort of Islam in their foreign policies. That's important. And that would help also the GCC countries to understand and to evolve basically what should Islam be as part of the 21st century. That's an important role. Otherwise, you know, currently what is happening is that the new enemy is Islam after the fall of the Soviet Union. And you need to evolve away from that.
And that's actually an interesting point that you bring up. Let me put it to you, Jassim Sultan, this idea of the role of Islam in governments. And Libya, I guess, is as good a case as any. What do you think that the Western governments are hoping for here? Because we're hearing a lot of talk about democracy and secular government with regards to Egypt, with regards to Libya. Do you think that this is actually going to go down well in this region, that this kind of pressure is now being applied?
Actually, it will not be an easy journey for these countries to travel to other democratic countries from the first instant. There will be hiccups on the way. But I think it seems that from majority of voices we hear from the TV and from the people we are meeting, actually, that all the Islamists or the others people around is looking forward for a new era, looking forward democratic countries. And I think these forces will be stronger and more powerful in shaping the future. So whatever we are seeing in the future, there will be hiccups, definitely. There will be difficulties. But I think these countries heading for democracy, I can say that without hesitation.
David Roberts, just on the big picture perspective here, tell us how this might play out over the longer term. I mean, the area, the Arab League and the GCC and the countries of this region, by and large, their approach to international relations has not been as of the West. Is that likely to change in the future? Are we going to see a more dynamic, a more active debate on these issues in this part of the world?
No, I wouldn't have thought so, to be perfectly honest. I don't really see as to why, you know, core strategic goals of the countries, be they members of the GCC or the Arab League, will have changed because of the revolution. I think that, you know, the key question of why did Qatar intervene in Libya, it's a question of they could intervene, as I say, in a very unusual confluence of events. And we've kind of had these kind of genuflections before. I mean, after the invasion of Kuwait.
I mean, let me stop you for a minute, because I mean, I take your point. Because of the size of the country, there is a limited amount of times that they can actually intervene in a physical sense. But Qatar has done much more than that in terms of making itself a hub for conversation. People come through Doha now on a very regular basis, having conversations, having meetings, making policy, don't they?
Well, there's one thing between having meetings, being a hub, but creating a brand. I mean, I do believe this quite a lot, the importance of burgeoning a brand, expanding the brand. So that's one thing. And then, you know, sending 6 Mirage fighter jets to potentially fire on fellow Arabs is quite the thing. Severe concerns about collateral damage there. getting some rebels, perhaps getting them to Doha, training them, sending them back, perhaps Qatari special forces getting involved in Libya. I mean, this is different levels of involvement here, significantly different levels, different levels, excuse me. So I think this is vastly different to what Qatar has done before. And I don't particularly expect Qatar to be able to do it again. I don't want to harp on, but because, as I say, Libya is a very unusual sort of state of affairs there.
Jassim Sultan, I suppose Lebanon might be a good pointer towards this, isn't it? Because Qatar was very popular in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, for a short while, and then when they started criticizing Syria, that entire perspective turned around, and they're not very popular anymore. So I guess we might have the same situation in Libya.
It seems that politics is a turbulence area. You cannot trust what the feeling of the people. Small turn here and there can shift the mood of the people away, or with a policy, certain policies. And now Qatar, I think, in Lebanon, despite what's happened in Syria, and there is huge people who's feeling that Qatar have helped in a turn point in Lebanon history. And I think the power of Qatar, because it is small, it has no there is no sense that Qatar is threatening any kind of political power in these countries. Qatar in generally kept as a place where people can have a safe land to talk to each other. And that will continue to be so, because if we see Lebanon, or we can see Sudan, or we can see other countries, people find that Qatar is helping in that regard, willingly and honestly, to help people to get together. And that role, that image which Qatar built, I don't think this will change in the nearby future. Having said that, the mood of the people between now and then in the political arena is totally unexpectable, and things can shift from here to there. Let's say that if there is just a small TV interview,
okay,
could it change the weather?
Well, exactly. And let me give the final question to Mansour Al-Rayed in Manama, because, you know, Al Jazeera itself, Al Jazeera Arabic, when it launched, just the airing of these conversations on television caused a big change in the dynamic of politics in the Gulf region, didn't it? Don't you think that the increasing vocality of the Qatari government may have a similar effect and maybe disrupt that traditional axis of Riyadh and Washington, D.C.?
No, actually it helps. I mean, these kind of conversation, it helps. I mean, it does help the relationships, and it does help the ability, although sometimes I feel that it goes overboard and it creates unnecessary tensions. But the key issue is between the GCC and the West, because the GCC are an important block of oil reserves, and therefore that relationship has to be very stable, and it will be stable. Now, the key element in ensuring that the GCC evolves its process is that some sort of a reconciliation needs to be done between the GCC countries, which are the core Muslim countries, and the West, in three particular areas. Basically, Western civilization relies, it's West, it's Rome, and it's Christianity. On the other side, we have the GCC countries. These are monarchies, Mecca, and Islam. These needs to be reconciled. Now, this reconciliation has two objectives. The West recognizes this as part of their foreign policy, while the East recognizes that it needs to evolve its Islam as part of the 21st century.
All right.
Thank you.
There, we'll have to leave it. Mansour Al-Rayed in Manama. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and thank you also to David Roberts here in Doha, and also Jassim Sultan here in Doha. That's it for this edition of Inside Story. It's very good of you to join us on the programme. Thank you, as always, for watching. We always welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the moment, that's it. We'll see you next time on Inside Story. Bye-bye.